The concert hall shimmered under the golden lights of the chandeliers, every seat filled with people dressed in their finest attire. The air buzzed with admiration as the famous pianist took his final bow after an astonishing performance. His hands, still trembling from the passion of the music, rested lightly on the piano lid as the applause thundered through the hall. When the clapping finally softened, he turned to the audience with a playful smile. "Music is meant to be shared," he said. "And tonight, I'd like to invite someone special to share it with me." His eyes drifted toward the side of the stage, where a young boy stood nervously beside an usher. The boy couldn't see the pianist's gesture, but he felt the shift in the air, the hush, the attention. He was small for his age, wearing a neatly pressed beige sweater, dark trousers, and a pair of black sunglasses that reflected the stage lights. In one hand, he held a white cane, in the other, nothing but his own quiet confidence. The audience whispered among themselves as the pianist motioned him forward. "Come on, son," he said warmly, "why don't you come up here and play something for us? Just for fun." A few polite laughs rippled through the crowd. Some people thought it was a charming gesture, others, perhaps, a bit of theater to end the night. The boy tilted his head slightly, as though listening to something invisible. Then, without hesitation, he stepped forward. Each tap of his cane echoed through the silent hall, steady and sure. As he reached the piano, the usher guided his hand to the bench. He sat down, his posture calm and deliberate. The famous pianist leaned against the instrument, smiling kindly but with mild curiosity, expecting a simple tune, maybe a few clumsy notes. The boy lifted his hands and hovered them above the keys, feeling the faint vibration of sound still lingering from the last performance. Then, with a deep breath, he smiled faintly. The audience leaned in, waiting for whatever would come next. For a long moment, the hall was so quiet that the faint hum of the stage lights could be heard. The boy's fingers floated just above the keys, trembling slightly, not with fear, but with anticipation. He inhaled deeply, letting the air fill his chest, then gently pressed down a single note. The soft sound rippled through the silence like the first drop of rain on still water. The note lingered, and then another followed, then another. Slowly, a pattern began to form. The boy tilted his head, listening intently, adjusting his touch as though he were speaking through the piano itself. Each key seemed to answer him, guiding him to the next. What began as hesitant curiosity soon blossomed into something alive. The melody deepened. His hands moved faster, surer, dancing across the keyboard with astonishing grace. His body swayed slightly as he played, completely lost in the rhythm. There was no sheet music, no guidance, no hesitation, just pure instinct. His touch was delicate yet full of conviction, every note blooming into the next like petals unfolding in perfect sequence. The pianist who had invited him to play leaned in, his smile fading to awe. He could hear it. Complex harmonies, emotional depth, a natural phrasing that even trained professionals struggled to master. This was not mimicry or luck. This was mastery. The audience, once relaxed and amused, began to shift in their seats. The laughter and whispers had vanished. Every face was turned toward the boy, their expressions frozen somewhere between disbelief and wonder. The young pianist's hands moved faster now, creating waves of sound that rose and fell like tides, tender, powerful, heartbreakingly beautiful. The famous pianist felt a chill crawl up his spine. He realized that the boy wasn't simply playing a melody. He was composing, right there, in front of everyone, something entirely new. When the final phrase emerged, soft and trembling like a breath, the hall was utterly still. The boy's fingers rested gently on the keys, and for a moment, it seemed as if time itself had stopped to listen. The music poured through the hall like light spilling through stained glass, vivid, alive, impossible to ignore. Every note shimmered with emotion, building on the last, weaving stories without words. The boy sat motionless except for his hands, which danced freely across the keys, drawing out sounds that seemed too vast to come from such a small body. Around him, the audience was transfixed. The murmurs had vanished completely. Some leaned forward unconsciously, as though moving closer might help them understand what they were hearing. Others sat perfectly still, eyes wide, breath held. It wasn't just the beauty of the music, it was the feeling that it came from somewhere deep and untouchable, a place beyond training or logic. The orchestra members behind the pianist had stopped preparing to leave. Violins rested motionless on laps, bows hung midair. A few musicians exchanged silent glances, half disbelief, half reverence. Even those who had played for decades, who thought they had heard everything, felt their hearts twist at the sound. The famous pianist stood slightly off to the side, his hands folded in front of him. At first, he had been smiling proudly, like a teacher watching a talented pupil. But now his face had changed, softened, humbled. His eyes glistened under the warm stage lights. He wasn't listening as a performer anymore. He was listening as a human being. The melody swelled, filling every corner of the concert hall. It rose and fell with a grace that felt almost spiritual, like a conversation between heaven and earth. The boy tilted his head back slightly, his face serene, his eyes closed behind his glasses. He could not see the crowd, but he could feel them, their silence, their heartbeat, the collective awe that filled the air like electricity. Then the tempo slowed, the notes softened, growing tender and reflective. The boy's hands trembled slightly as they came to rest on the final chord, holding it for just a second longer than expected. The sound hung in the air, a fragile, perfect moment suspended in time. When the last vibration faded into silence, no one moved. The hall was still, as though the entire world had forgotten to breathe. For several seconds after the final note, the concert hall remained frozen in silence. The sound seemed to linger in the air long after the boy's fingers had lifted from the keys, like the echo of a dream that refused to fade. The boy sat still, his hands resting lightly on his lap, head tilted slightly toward the piano as though listening to something only he could hear. Then, slowly, the audience began to stir. One person clapped, hesitant at first, almost afraid to break the spell, and then another, and another, until a wave of applause rose through the hall like a storm breaking open the sky. The crowd stood to their feet, their cheers mingling with gasps and laughter of disbelief. Some people wiped their eyes, others simply stared at the boy as if they had witnessed something impossible. The famous pianist was still standing off to the side, but now he was trembling. He stepped forward slowly, his polished shoes gliding soundlessly across the stage floor. His heart pounded, and when he finally reached the boy, he had to swallow before speaking. "That was extraordinary," he said softly, almost afraid his voice might shatter the moment. "What piece was that?" The boy turned toward him, his expression calm and unassuming. "I don't know," he replied with a small shrug. "I just played what I heard." The pianist blinked, unsure he'd heard correctly. "You mean, you made that up? Just now?" The boy nodded. "It's what the piano told me to play." For a moment, the pianist couldn't find words. He looked at the boy, this blind child who had sat at his instrument with no music, no guidance, and somehow created something divine, and he felt tears sting his eyes. All his years of training, his awards, his fame, all of it seemed small compared to the purity of what he had just witnessed. The crowd's applause grew even louder, rising to a roar. People were on their feet, shouting, cheering, whistling, their excitement spilling over. The boy stood, smiling shyly in the direction of the sound, and gave a small bow. He couldn't see the hundreds of faces staring back at him, but he could feel their warmth, their gratitude, their wonder. The pianist placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "You don't just play music," he whispered. "You are music." The boy smiled faintly, turning his face toward him. "It's all I can see," he said quietly. And in that instant, the pianist knew he had witnessed something far beyond talent, something divine, something eternal. The next morning, the world woke up to the sound of that performance. Someone in the audience had recorded the entire thing, a shaky video that began as a casual clip and ended as a miracle. Within hours, it had spread across social media like wildfire. Headlines appeared on news sites and music blogs. "Blind boy stuns concert hall with spontaneous piano masterpiece." The video was shared millions of times, each viewer left speechless by what they heard. Clips played on television talk shows. Musicians analyzed his phrasing and tone. Critics called it divine instinct. Even the famous pianist, the man who had invited him on stage, spoke publicly, his voice trembling with emotion. In that moment, he said, "I wasn't the teacher. I was the student." Back in his small apartment, the boy sat at the same upright piano where he had first learned to feel the keys by touch. The walls were bare except for a few sheets of Braille music pinned near the window. His mother stood behind him, phone in hand, reading out the endless messages pouring in, offers from conservatories, interviews, invitations to play around the world. The boy listened quietly, nodding, a faint smile on his lips. But after a moment, he lifted his hands and began to play again. The same old piano filled the room with music, soft, gentle, alive. He didn't play the viral melody or the grand composition that had made him famous. Instead, he played something new, something that belonged only to that morning, that sunlight, that feeling. His mother stopped reading. She simply stood there, watching her son lost in his world of sound. The notes flowed like a river, effortless and pure. He didn't need the applause, the fame, or the lights of a concert hall. For him, music wasn't performance, it was language. It was how he saw the world, how he understood joy, sadness, and hope. The world might have discovered a prodigy, a genius beyond comprehension, but the boy had discovered something even greater. He smiled as his fingers drifted across the final chord, the sound fading softly into silence. Then he whispered to himself, almost like a secret prayer, "I don't play to be heard. I play to feel alive."